It is the 26th of April. It's actually the 24th, but we're recording this to make sure that we can deliver you a fantastic show. And we have a fantastic guest tonight, Jeff Eager. He is the former mayor of Bend, Oregon, and is a blogger and a lawyer and somebody who does quite interesting investigative work in his blogging and digs into these issues. One of his favorite topics is one we're really thrilled to talk about too, which is Congresswoman Val Hoyle, LaMotta, Shemia Fagan, and then of course you've all also focused a lot on Measure 110 in many of your writings too. But welcome to the show, Jeff.
Thanks, Kevin. Glad to be back.
So I guess why don't we launch right into it? Val Hoyle is, I don't know if she's what her advice is or if she gets any, but it has really become a serious matter, hasn't it? That she's being investigated by the feds, but she also clearly wanted to make sure that she could make that happen. Any investigation take place after as long a period of time as possible into her tenure in Congress. And the latest thing, of course, was the article in the Daily Beast, which is not a Republican-leaning publication, to put it mildly. The Daily Beast is famously liberal and maybe even progressive, and they did an expose on her, saying that she's essentially the driving force behind this illegal grant that was done during her tenure as the labor commissioner for the state of Oregon. It's an elected position. She started in 2021, working with this. As far as we know, that's the earliest time period that's been established. And then there's a progression of how she gradually tried to shape how this would work. She got donations from the now famous LaMotta, or the Weed as it's translated into English, pot company, which owes millions and millions of dollars in tax liens to the federal and state governments, has been sued like 40, 50, 60 times in the state of Oregon for delinquency on paying its bills. And yet they had bags of cash they could give to a whole variety of Democrat office holders and candidates. And one of them, Shemia Fagan, actually they hired to be a consultant to go out and promote getting licenses for LaMotta in other states as a moonlighting job to being Secretary of State. Just one little small problem. Shemia Fagan appears to have gone into an audit which was going to scrutinize LaMotta itself and tried to manipulate that audit, which apparently is still considered an audit by the auditors and the current Secretary of State. But it did lead to Shemia Fagan pretty quickly resigning. Now she's under federal investigation. LaMotta's under federal investigation, and as we know, the federal investigation has been extended now through subpoena to include Val Hoyle and her activities in this, now we know to be an entirely illegal grant using federal money that was given to this cannabis company, with all these problems. And then she proceeded, following her tenure at as Boley commissioner, to withhold public records on her cell phone, her private cell phone, on which she did business, public business, which makes it a public record. She spent 11 months trying to withhold that. And in fact, still there is no way to confirm that she's actually turned in everything that she should turn in. But now, of course, she's under federal investigation. So she probably doesn't want to turn in anything that looks too incriminating at this point, or at least devastating to her reelection campaign. And she did take donations for her congressional campaign from LaMotta as well. So you have followed this all along the way. You kind of have, and you filed a federal election complaint against her because you can't take more than $100 in federal cash.
Yeah.
And then you're supposed to return it right away. And
Yep.
you rightly question that which is the modus operandi of LaModa. They do donate cash. And now there's something that they probably should just call the LaModa rule in the state of Oregon, that you can't donate more than $100 in cash to a state candidate either, right?
Yep. That's right. It should be called the LaModa rule. And I didn't even realize this. I was in Eugene a few weeks ago. There are still LaModa outlets open. Like, there was a retail store that I drove by. I was like, holy smokes, it's LaModa. And I don't understand how they continue to operate as a business. I really don't. Like, I just don't get it, with all the liens against their properties and all the lawsuits they've been subject to, the federal investigation. And I mean, I don't know that there's legal grounds to shut them down. I'm just shocked they have the financial wherewithal to stay in business. So that was news to me. I mean, I guess I shouldn't be too surprised, but yeah, with regard to Congresswoman Hoyle, I think she's just really bad at being a congressperson. I think her political instincts are really, really bad. I don't think there's any way to interpret the record regarding the grant that went to the LaModa affiliated nonprofit that, as you mentioned, was illegal under federal law, in that the state of Oregon had to claw back what was left after the grant was issued. I mean, Hoyle pretty clearly forced that thing through BOLI, the agency she was running here in Oregon.
Clearly.
I don't know how to interpret that any other way. I don't know what her defense would be, other than that she just likes apprenticeships. But I think she pretty clearly did a favor for campaign donors. I don't know how else to think about that, and that's that's a problem for her. But her instincts, her bad instincts, I think, go beyond even that. Like, she tweeted earlier this week, I think, or last week. Well, no, it would have been earlier this week. On 420, she tweeted with her and Earl Blumenauer, who's a congressman from Portland who's retiring, and talking about how we need to turn our backs on the failed war on drugs, and make it easier for pot companies to do banking. Even if you think that those are good policy arguments, that's just not where things are headed right now. I mean, if anything, Oregon's experience with Measure 110, I think, has caused people to be pretty shy about, making drugs more available than they are already. That term, failed war on drugs, that's what the Drug Policy Alliance and the other defenders of Measure 110 used repeatedly while they were unsuccessfully defending the measure, saying that everyone who wanted to, revise, reform, repeal Measure 110 wanted to go back to the failed war on drugs. Even Democrat legislators didn't care for the most part. They're like, okay, fine, we have to do this because people are really mad about the effect of this measure.
Yeah.
But here's Hoyle, using that same terminology with regard to marijuana, which has been legal recreationally in Oregon for a long, like 10 years now or something. So it just doesn't fit. It doesn't fit the times. I think the marijuana stuff, to be honest with you, is headed in the other direction nationally. The NIH, National Institutes of Health, which is a federal agency, they came out with a report in the last couple of weeks about how regular marijuana use contributes to, with some very serious mental health problems for young people. And I think what we're seeing is that kind of this gradual liberalization of drug laws, which Oregon has been on the vanguard of in many different respects. I think it's turning around now, and I think that for her to go on social media and to talk about letting pot companies bank more easily under federal law, when she's got the record she does on that issue, and I think that voters are kind of turning the other way, it doesn't make any sense to me. She's acting like she's untouchable politically, and or she just doesn't know, right? Like she's
just tin air, right?
Yeah. That's I was surprised, and what that meant to me is that even beyond the scandal stuff that she's dealt with, she's just not good at being a politician. Like she can't read the room, so to speak, and for her to focus on that stuff, it just doesn't make any sense to me. So yeah, she's not very good.
Well, and the Breitbart article pointed out how there's a lot of communication that was going on. And of course, Willamette Week had also uncovered some of this. There's a lot of communication going on between her and the LaMotta people and people within Boley.
Yep.
And so it seems kind of short-sighted of her, because you always have the other half of the conversation. In those, even if you didn't have everything off of her private cell phone that she tried to really conceal for as long as she could, pretend like she didn't even know someone had requested it. But she was coaching the LaMotta executives on what to do during a meeting that she was chairing of a commission in Boley to decide whether or not the grant would be issued. That means that the stuff on her phone would indicate exactly what she was trying to do. And then also, I remember it was a topic in a couple of these articles is how do you get a federal grant for a cannabis company when it's against federal law to do that? How do you get it? Well, there's only one answer to that question, I think, because on the federal end, unless you think that they just missed it or rolled over for it, someone didn't tell them. And that was the subject of one of the articles. Someone didn't tell them that it was a cannabis company. Well, they know it's a cannabis company. There's no doubt that Val Hoyle knew it, and the other people who were discussing whether to give the grant or not knew it. So someone didn't tell the feds that it was a cannabis company. Who decided that that was going to be done? Who decided that?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I don't know the details of how that federal grant was to be administered, but the idea that no one at Boley, that it didn't occur to anyone at Boley, like, hey, cannabis is still illegal under federal law. This is federal money, but let's jam through this grant to this cannabis nonprofit. I mean, it doesn't make any sense unless the overriding impetus on Hoyle's part was to reward a campaign donor, which is, I think, exactly what happened. And her problem is it looks exactly like that. And, she's been going back and forth with Boley and the media about her phone and her public records. DOJ or US DOJ is not going to be as patient as Boley has been with her. They don't mess around with discovery stuff like that. So I think that the public records request stuff is probably not top of her list of concerns right now. I think it's probably having the FBI knock on her door.
Well, and the other thing is, the feds don't always start when they're dealing with a government agency. They don't always start with a subpoena. That's when they don't get the cooperation, right? I seem to recall that when the feds were asking for information from the state of Oregon with regard to Shemia Fagan, the attorney general actually pushed back and said, you're asking for a lot here. Like, this is really hard, and do you really need all this? And like, they were already dragging their heels on somebody who'd resigned. So I can only imagine that the feds decided that they needed a subpoena because they weren't getting cooperation. And by the way, it's worth mentioning that Val Hoyle's very likely general election opponent, Monique Despain, played a role in this because her campaign team put together a website called What's Val Hiding, just asking the question because it seems like there's something missing and she's doesn't want people to know it. What's valhiding.com. And then she did a press conference and sent a letter to the U.S. attorney for the state of Oregon saying your investigation is not complete if you don't extend it to include Val Hoyle and this pattern of corruption that it is apparent from. And the reports are dominated not by, red meat conservative outlets. In fact, Willamette Week, the Daily Beast, the Oregonian was also mentioned in there. Some of your work was cited too. But I think those outlets, you can't ascribe to the Willamette Week or the Daily Beast partisan political motives for ousting Val Hoyle. They're just actually exposing what was being said and what was being done and what there were records to back up. And so why is it that, so Monique Despain just got this exposed, and then 5 days later, which we only learned weeks after that, they had subpoenaed this. So the feds had to force the issue, it looks like, rather than just having a nice government to government information exchange. So there must be a lot of records that they're coming through. And Val Hoyle is probably very concerned that she's going to have to tell them everything she knows or be the subject of the investigation herself, which she said no one's talked to her, but that's pretty common that they gather all the info and then they talk to you once they have it, right?
Yeah, a lot of times I think the FBI will so the DOJ subpoenas documents that they think are relevant, and then everyone goes through them. The lawyers and the FBI go through them, and then they know what to ask her about, right? Because in an interview, if she agrees to an interview, and she doesn't have to, but oftentimes if people want to be cooperative, they do that. So yeah, they're apparently in the process of gathering those documents so that they can ask her informed questions if they do get the chance to ask her informed questions. So yeah, I think she should be worried about it. I'm sure she is. Well, I shouldn't say that. Given the tweet last week or on 420, maybe she's not concerned, but she probably should be.
By the way, the tweet last week for everybody listening and watching here was celebrating the pot smoking holiday of 420 or April 20th, which has various mythology around the origin of the date. But the intention and what's being celebrated is not obscure. It's like smoke as much pot as you can that day and, blow it in the face of anybody who doesn't like it because, they're going to do whatever they want now. It's legal, and they were kind of that way before it was legal. And Val Hoyle stood next to Earl Blumenauer, who is in a district that has 40% more Democrats than Republicans in it. And Val Hoyle is in a district that has about 4% more Democrats than Republicans. And she agreed with Earl Blumenauer that it should be every day should be 420. So we should just smoke as much pot as we can every day and celebrate that. And then she went about attacking what they described as the war on drugs in a state that is literally reeling from the fentanyl and meth epidemics that drug decriminalization. I mean, the talking points they had there are the same ones that were used to explain why we needed Measure 110 in the first place, which could be more repudiated at this point. So that was a really amazingly stupid tweet in the context of what we just talked about, which is that you'd think she'd know that this does not have a good look for her.
Yeah, you would like to think so. I was just actually looking for that tweet and wonder if she took it down. That'd be
I
pretty.
just saw it a few minutes ago.
Okay. Is it on her official Twitter account or
It's her
her?
own official Twitter account.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
It might not be for very long because someone in our communications team that, and by the way, these tweets are often done by someone on a comms team, but I don't think they do it when it's the candidate themselves, thinking that the candidate's going to have a problem with they themselves standing next to Earl Blumenauer talking about for an end. I mean, who believes at all that this person is serious about what's happening to the country and to the state
Yeah.
with fentanyl and meth addiction when she's celebrating a date for smoking as much pot as possible and then getting rid of any attempt to counter drug abuse.
Yeah, for sure. And I did find it. You're right. It's still up. And she just tweeted on April 20th, of course. It's 420, and we are fighting back against the failed war on drugs. And then there's this video of her and Earl Blumenauer both wearing their green bike pins, which I'll say a few things about that in a minute. But and they're talking about how we need to pass legislation at the federal level to deschedule cannabis so that it can be so that people can cannabis businesses can bank more easily, because the fact that it's still illegal under federal law makes that it can make it difficult. As I understand it right now, they have plenty of banking opportunities, at least credit unioning opportunities now. But yeah, super odd for Hoyle to say right after her state has resoundingly repealed Measure 110.
Yeah, her own party,
people in her own party to say that she is fighting back against the failed war on drugs. Wow, I think that's way out of step with where voters are in Oregon right now, even a lot of Democrat voters in Oregon. And it's just tone deaf. I mean, and especially given like what we just talked about, Kevin, with her helping out famous. I mean, maybe what she's most famous for is having helped out this cannabis company with an illegal federal grant. And here she is talking about 420 and how we need to make it easier for these folks to bank. It's tone deaf, and I think indicative to me that her scandal foibles are not simply isolated to scandalous stuff. I think she's just bad at being a congressperson. I think she does not understand. She doesn't have a good sense of where her constituents are, where things are headed on drug policy in Oregon and elsewhere. And it just seemed completely out of step to me. So that's, yeah. And then she ends with a graphic, happy 420 Oregon. It's like, okay, well, yeah. And that's I'm not saying that Oregonians are ready to repeal, legal weed or anything like that. But I think that I also don't think Oregonians are real excited about expanding the kind of influence that pot companies have in Oregon. They've seen what that is doing, and she's right in the middle of that. So it's something else, Kevin.
Yeah, it's tone deaf. She's tone deaf on the border too. There was an article that was written in Breitbart, national publication, and it was based on a press conference that Val Hoyle did at the southern border in El Paso, Texas, along with 3 other Democrat female Congress women that are sponsoring a piece of legislation they call the Dignity Act, which is essentially to codify into law what they're already doing at the border, which is processing as many people as they can into the inside of the country as possible, but just make it a bit easier. And assign federal funds to it. This was, and this is something that they thought would be a great topic for a press conference after they apparently did a tour of the border, whatever that looked like. But that same location, just 7 weeks later, was the location in El Paso, Texas, where Texas National Guardsmen were overrun and assaulted by a whole bunch of military age males that were trying to enter the country illegally, and they just ran over them and thumped them.
Yeah.
And of course, the rules of engagement are very strict. Like you know, obviously, some National Guardsmen could have just taken those guys out before they can't do it.
Yep.
And so they got overrun. And then 10 days after that, the people that overran them in El Paso, Texas, were released on their own recognizance into the United States. They could be anywhere. They could be down the street from you or me. And that's what the message we sent was: go ahead and do that. That's El Paso, Texas. That was the same location. She said in the press conference, we need this movement across the border. We need it. She thinks it's a great workforce solution. She was the labor commissioner. So this is her great solution, is that I guess her top priority as labor commissioner was not to assist people in need of protection or promotion of American labor, but just to bring in as much labor from third world countries, no matter what it consists of, including if it consists of people who assault and overrun Texas National Guardsmen. It's fun.
Yep.
This is another like tone deaf moment that comports with this, because there is a tie between what's happening in this, what she claims to be she's fighting against the war on drugs, and actually that is being fueled. The drugs are being fueled by what's coming across that southern border right now.
Yep. I think what we're seeing with Hoyle, we're seeing with a lot of other Democrats right now, is they have just spent 4 years, especially in a place like Oregon, where they can say and do whatever they want. I mean, and they can say we want open borders. They can say failed war on drugs. They can say, I'm not worried about, the impact of drugs in our state. Crime's not getting worse. The BLM riots were just peaceful protests. We're going to fix climate change by regulating and taxing Oregonians. Like, that's what they've been saying that, and they've gotten away with it really since, for sure since 2020 and even before then. But I think what's happening is that voters are moving out from underneath them on that stuff. Like the border stuff and the drug stuff is so in your face that they can't, they're not going to be able to lie their way around it the way they used to. There's too many people that are actually reporting, even some of the lefty type of media outlets are actually reporting the news on this stuff to a degree. And if you look at polling nationally, Democrats are worried about the border too. Like it's really their elected officials and their really kind of hard left progressive donors who are driving the train for that party on that stuff. Same with drugs right now. I mean, honestly, and you have people like Hoyle. Like some Democrats are getting it faster, some are getting it slower. Hoyle's getting it slower.
Yeah, and in a district, and they've had a lot of close elections, but it's almost like, well, even if we win by a microscopic hair, pedal to the metal. We're right, and this is smart stuff, and they're going to love it once we do it. Which there couldn't be a bigger example of how that blew up in their faces than Measure 110. Which, by the way, you've done a lot of reporting about this. The Soros link to all of this stuff. It's sponsored by George Soros and the organizations that he works with and funds. And Oregon is one of their laboratories.
Yep. And it was a laboratory that gave them results they didn't want and that we didn't want.
Oops.
If you go through the record, like their nonprofit filings, I think it was in 2020 or 2019, their annual report that they had to give to the IRS, they have to disclose, like, we're working with these people in these states. And they talked about Measure 110. It wasn't a measure at the time, but they said we've identified Oregon as a good opportunity because of the politics there, and we're going to give it a try. And they did. It just totally blew up in their face. I mean, it's not funny. I shouldn't laugh because they killed a bunch of people here in Oregon, but they put all their eggs or a lot of their eggs in the Oregon basket, and George Soros and his folks funded most everything to get Measure 110 passed, and then spent a bunch of money trying to defend it unsuccessfully. And you could tell they were kind of getting desperate toward the end of that, when it was clear that they didn't even have a majority of Democrats in the legislature carrying their water for them anymore. And I've got to think that the Drug Policy Alliance, which was co-founded by George Soros and funded by him, I'll bet they had some strategic planning meetings, and they're probably having to revamp the way that they're approaching this stuff, because Oregon was such a disaster for their reason for existing, and it didn't work here, and it's not going to work other places either. But if it's not going to work in Oregon, and you're going to get a majority of progressive Democrats in Oregon, of all places, to vote to repeal the thing and recriminalize drugs, boy, how are you going to sell that policy anywhere else if you can't do it in Oregon? I mean, they're done. Like that decriminalization, I think, it's got to be done in the United States for a while anyway, just because of how badly it went here in Oregon. And it's unfortunate that we were the test case for it, but maybe we did everyone else some good by showing that it's not working, and then being a very progressive state that went ahead and repealed it.
Yeah, we've provided the TV B-roll coverage for literally every ad that you could run against trying to do this in any other state.
Yep.
We've also got, of course, the lawless cashless bail district attorney complement to these policies that is also Soros funded, and has also pervaded many cities, other cities around the country, where we're learning the toughest lesson, because we've combined all of these worst policies together in one place.
Yep.
And then we turn around and we say the only way we can solve all the problems that we just dramatically exacerbated is by taking several years to build expensive housing for people that are on the streets. And so it's created a whole industrial complex that doesn't solve the problem, but requires an enormous amount of cash.
And it doesn't only not solve the problem, it makes the problem worse. Like Metro is raised like $1 billion in their homeless fund, and it hasn't helped. It literally. I haven't written this yet, but at some point I want to. Like, there, as conservatives, a lot of us have said, well, it's not just spending money. Spending more money doesn't solve the problem,
right?
Which is true. In Oregon, I think there's a really good argument that can be made, not just to conservatives, but to everyone, that spending more money makes things worse. And not only with regard to homelessness and drugs and all that, it's like our state cannot walk and chew gum at the same time. And they spend these massive amounts of money, and they don't really know what they're doing. So they do things unlawfully sometimes, like the grant. And they just throw more money at the problem. And, even every time I see an Oregon politician say, no Oregonian should have to do XYZ, or we're spending $30 million on this. And I just saw Kotek was talking about that earlier this week. It's like, stop talking about how much money you're spending. How much money you're spending is at the very least totally uncorrelated to whatever results you're going to get out of things. And I would argue that it actually really does make things worse, because so much of the spending that our state government does is it just goes to enrich these nonprofits that fuel they're kind of just barely like hidden activist groups and political groups, and it's just this cycle. The money just keeps flying through, and it creates bad policy and really bad results. And there's just you can't the problem that Democrats in Oregon have right now is that they've run everything forever, and the results are manifestly bad. And
yeah, they own all of it.
Yep,
they own all of it.
Everything.
Well, and it's funny what you just pointed out is true. It's like what happens is whether it solves the problem or not, it creates kind of a crony class that comes and feeds at that trough, and then demands that the spending continue to vindicate the good intentions stated by the politicians. And then the politicians become dependent on the largesse of donations and support that they get from all the people. And it just doesn't even matter if it's solving the problem, but it ends up costing enormous sums of money, which cannot be afforded, or they certainly can't be afford to be squandered on something that's getting worse. And that's what has been happening. It's been getting worse.
Yep.
I don't know that. I mean, it's a kind of an elitist thing to be able to sit back and do this with other people's money. You actually did the reporting that determined that this executive director for Endeavor, the nonprofit founded and controlled by LaMotta, what was her name? It was Vega.
Vega, yes. I forget her first name, but yeah, last name Vega.
And she was the Suzanne Vega.
Yeah.
Which is, I think, I wasn't sure it's a musician's name too.
I know. I was thinking that too. It sounds like a made up name almost, but maybe it's her stage name.
Could be. But she ended up donating $1,000 in April of 2022, and it paid off handsomely with a $97,000 job.
A pretty good return.
Yep. To run a nonprofit that essentially cratered immediately, and the grant was clawed back. And when it was clawed back, that was the part they couldn't claw back, was the person who got paid, which, again, you create this cycle, like you were talking about, of dependency, of political investedness that you just can't extricate yourself from. And then once all these people know that what you were doing, they all become witnesses that can flip on you.
Yep.
I'm not sure who's flipping on whom. Are they trying to get the people in Boley to flip on the LaMotta people? Or are they trying to get the LaMotta people to flip on Val Hoyle? Could be both, actually. And
good. Yeah.
Where they may.
Yeah. And that's a good question. And I don't know that those investigations are kind of a black box for all of us outside of them. I would love to know what's going on with the federal investigation of the LaMotta stuff. But I think it'll depend on, do they view this as a political corruption case first and foremost, or do they view it as we're going to get pot businesses case? And I don't know which way it goes, right? I mean, it's, you hear rumors, and I've never seen this substantiated, but there is a logic to it that, somehow these legit, quote unquote, legit pot businesses are affiliated with illegal marijuana activities and cartels and everything else. And that might help explain how LaMotta still had cash when it owed everyone money, and why it was giving donations in cash to politicians. But it's really, I don't know who they're going to try to flip on the other. It'll be very interesting.
So some of the other stories that you've covered here relate to, well, I found one very interesting a number of months back. The notorious LGV, who is now our Secretary of State, that was appointed by Kate Brown, Lavon Griffin Valade.
Yeah.
and she was the former City of Portland auditor and a novelist. Apparently, is great
Yes.
qualification there. She's writing a lot of fiction nowadays, that's for sure. But there is, she kind of blessed an audit
Yeah.
that is
Yeah.
just hard to believe.
She blessed. So the audit that you mentioned earlier that got our old Secretary of State out of her job, which was an audit about the way the state of Oregon regulates cannabis businesses, that was very critical of the regulation of cannabis businesses, that just happened to be going on. That audit was going on literally while Shemia Fagan, the old Secretary of State, was on the payroll of LaModa.
Yeah.
And it was, even by the time I remember that scandal, the Fagan scandal hit before the audit even came out. And by the time the audit came out, shortly after the Fagan stuff kind of got blown up, it was like, okay, well, who cares about this audit now? We know it's tainted, right? Like this, and everyone, like the Attorney General, the governor, everyone's like, well, we'll see what about this audit. I don't, they were kind of like, yeah, don't pay any attention to it. And then Levon Griffin Vlad says, no, I stand behind it, and it's a joke. And she prides herself on her auditing background. So I think she views it as like she's defending her auditors. But the last audit that office came out with, I think it was last week, maybe this week, was about how the Oregon DEQ can achieve their goal of being an anti-racist organization. Like literally they did an audit on that. And who knows how much that costs, but I think you just get rid of the whole damn office. Like if what the audit, if this is what the audit office is doing, the bidding of someone who's on the payroll of a pot business, and then just standing behind this obviously conflicted audit. It's just another political tool for whoever Secretary of State, and it doesn't provide any reliable, decent information for Oregon voters. So I say get rid of it.
It's just a big kabuki dance there, and one of the problems is too that this is a state government that can't actually execute IT projects at all.
No.
That literally right now the Oregon DMV is experiencing an outage that affects driver's license and IDs. It's the thing you expect the DMV to be able to do, and they can't. I happen to know that when just the other day we were checking to see that we're going to try to advise people on how they could go and update their registration online if they needed to, so that they could, see just how simple it was. If they wanted to make sure they could vote in, say, the Republican primary, they could just update it, check and see if they're registered Republican, and change it to Republican. 2 minutes later, done, right? It was down.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
we couldn't show it to them because it was down.
Yeah.
And then this is the same state that's doing these silly audits that can't account for $450 million in emergency housing funds from the federal government. That's there if we have a major earthquake or other serious natural disaster. And it was used during COVID, and it went somewhere.
It's just, $500 million, but it gets lost, I guess. I mean, it's, and I Kevin, you're right that the degree to which the state of Oregon is incompetent is really shocking. I'm sure I was critical of state government 10, 15 years ago because I don't agree with, the policies that they were enacting at the time and whatnot. But the inability of the state government to do anything other than collect taxes it's remarkable. I'm much more familiar with what happens in Oregon than other states, but it's hard for me to imagine that there are other states that are worse. And I include California in that statement, because Oregon, it just proves that it literally can't do anything except collect taxes, and it's good at that, and that's all it does, because that's what it's optimized to do, right? Like the whole, you talked about kind of the money cycle. The biggest money cycle we've got going in Oregon, and it's been around for a long time, is the public sector unions, and they give a bunch of money to Democrat politicians like Tina Kotek. Those politicians win, and then those politicians are negotiating the contracts with the people that just got them elected. And lo and behold, they get big raises. And then the dues come in and they go back into the campaign coffers of these politicians. And that, if you look at, like, if you were looking like a strength, what do they call it? A strength, weakness, opportunity, threat analysis, a SWOT.
SWOT analysis, yeah.
It, like, the only strength is that the state of Oregon's super good at laundering money from taxpayers to public sector union members to Democrat politicians, and it's good at that. But everything else, it's bad at.
Yeah, it's the only thing that they actually want to do more of in an unlimited fashion. Everything else is an excuse to do more of it. They're actually also really good at killing juvenile salmon. That was an excellent article you had. That they removed the Klamath Dam. They're trying to get rid of these hydroelectric dams, which rely on the horrifically unrenewable water and gravity to generate electricity, which already accounted safely for the propagation of fish population of the salmon. And in removing the dam, they killed 830,000 juvenile salmon because of all the stuff that was released when the dams were removed, which is totally predictable.
Yeah.
And it reminds me of that hilarious saying from the Vietnam War era: in order to save the town from communism, it had to be destroyed.
Destroyed. Yeah. Yeah. And it's that dam thing it's symbolic, and I think typical of where a lot of our environmental kind of debates are these days, which is, what is the benefit, right? So you say we need to save these, we need to tear out these dams for the salmon. You tear out the dams and you kill almost 1 million salmon. You want to regulate and tax Oregonians to somehow affect global temperatures just based on Oregon policy. It won't. It can't. So what I'm hoping voters gradually come to understand is that the cost of doing these things, like taking out the dams, like decarbonizing our economy, look at what the cost is and look at what the benefit is. I mean, there's just literally no benefit in a lot of cases. And I would argue that's definitely the case with any state climate policy. But yeah, what it comes down to, I think, is that there is a contingent of environmental activists, and not by no means all of them. I think a lot of us that live in Oregon would consider ourselves environmentalists, regardless of our thought about like what policies get us there.
Yeah.
But they just want to tear stuff down. They want to tear dams down. They want people to stop driving their cars. They want people to stop shipping oil and coal on trains through Oregon. They just want to stop. They just don't like modern American civilization and the economy.
As long as they have it for themselves.
Exactly. They benefit from it for sure. But they, and if tearing down the dams kills almost 1 million salmon, well, that was going to happen. We did say it would save the salmon, but it killed them instead. That's fine, but at least the dams are gone. And I think when you really kind of burrow down, it's a whole lot of waste and a whole lot of making things more expensive for regular Oregonians who don't even know this stuff's happening.
They're unaware.
They're unaware. They're unaware that the a bunch of people, including the Biden administration, want to tear out the Snake River dams now, which would do bad things to our already bad trends in electricity prices. So it's like, you want to know why it's so expensive to live in Oregon. I mean, that's one of the reasons. And it's been kind of, I think when the economy's been good, people kind of don't pay as much attention to it. But the economy is not good in the sense that it's really expensive for people to live right now. And that's why.
Yeah. The true absurdity of that was a $450 million project to demolish those 4 hydroelectric dams. It's funny, when they waste money, it seems to always be at least $450 million. I think it was a similar figure when they tried to build the Cover Oregon website.
Yeah, I think so.
We've got to hit our number.
Yeah.
But that also removed a source of inexpensive carbon-free electricity for 70,000 homes.
Yep.
So inflation has a cause. It's called the Democrat Party.
Yeah.
At this point. And until they face consequences for this, they're going to keep doing it. And I think 2022, unfortunately, didn't send enough of a message to them. It didn't. Now you've got another really good article here about. Well, there's so many good articles that you. And folks, by the way, Oregon Roundup.substack.com. Go there. This is where you can find all the stuff that Jeff publishes. It's really good. There's one about the cost of the new cage-free egg laws. That's great. There's I like the clumsy cleanup one, talking about Tina Kotek and all of her staff that have been literally running for the door. There's the one that I haven't had a chance to read, but maybe you can give us a preview. The left-wing money that pulls the Oregon news media further to the left, as if we really needed that.
Yeah.
And then, of course, you got the sanity test for the Democrat Party and the Secretary of State's race. The very Secretary of State office that we've got, the notorious LGB, we've got preceded by Shemia Fagan. And now we've got some options there. Why don't you tell us about a couple of those things so that folks can go and read some more about?
Yeah, on the media thing, pulling the media left. That's an article that it's up there for paid subscribers. But what I talk about in there is that kind of what the media marketplace looks like in Oregon right now and how that's affecting things. So I think most people know, probably everyone who's listening to or watching this knows that kind of the old model of advertising-based news media has almost completely collapsed. And so that's why you've got, outlets like the Oregonian, the Bend Bulletin, pretty much all the legacy outlets have just been decimated in terms of their reporting ability because they don't make money anymore. And so what is filling that space to a significant degree is people doing the weird stuff we do, like just kind of on our own. But then there's also a whole lot of left-wing dark money that comes into play as well. And that's a lot of people don't know that the Oregon Capitol Chronicle, which is based out of Salem, as it sounds like it would be, and they've got it's a web-based publication, and they've got some legitimate reporters there, and they actually do some decent journalism, but they're very left-wing, and part of the reason why is they were stood up by a left-wing dark money organization called States Newsroom, which was funded initially by this network of left-wing dark money groups around an organization called Arabella Advisors out of DC. And what they did is, a number of years ago, the people that founded States Newsroom were like, well, we want to affect voters' opinions about things. We want them to want to do the things we want to do. So let's start influencing news coverage directly right? So let's pay the salaries of these reporters, and we're going to make sure our story gets out. And that's what they're doing. And which is funny, and it not funny, it's depressing. It shows you how much money they have because they're doing that in Oregon. Like we needed more left-wing news coverage in Oregon. Like the Oregonian was doing pretty well with that, and well, the Willamette Week, but they've got so much money. They're doing that in safe blue states, or what they consider safe blue states.
Wow.
So the point of that piece was, we're going to get run over. I mean, we are going to get run over because they are investing a ton of money in the creation of news content that is sympathetic to their political perspective. And as the advertising-based outlets continue to decline, it's going to be more and more these kind of, news media is just going to be like, I think pretty explicitly just a political operation.
Yeah.
And the progressives are way out ahead on that issue.
They are. It's interesting because the Oregon Capital Chronicle, it's not just the Oregon Capital Chronicle. I happen to know, like in the 4th Congressional District, that all those little newspapers along the coast and in Corvallis and other places, they don't have real news staffs that cover stories. They just take the Oregon Capital Chronicle stuff and they reprint that.
Yep.
So for weeks, if a story gets into the Oregon Capital Chronicle, it cascades down through all these smaller, like local and weekly newspapers. And so they know it's impactful. I remember recently also hearing that George Soros is buying up a whole bunch of radio stations across the country. And so while we were all thinking, everything's fine, and I'm sure talk radio will always be there and newspapers are honest and focused on local issues, actually they're all being bought up and turned into propaganda pieces for the guy who gave us Measure 110.
Yep.
What could go wrong with that?
Yeah. What could go wrong with it, right? Like it shows you what we're up against. And by we, I mean anyone who's not like a hardcore progressive. One of the reasons why Oregon has gotten as bad as it has is because of the poor quality of news coverage that happens in this state. And it's a big part of that is because they're all ideologically the same, right? These are all Democrats, and maybe they don't register Democrat just so they can say they don't register Democrat, but they're all lefty people, and that's fine. Lefty people can report the news, and but there's really no, like, if you're looking for reporting of stuff from a non-left wing perspective, it's really hard to find in Oregon. And that's why there was no oversight of, the media just didn't really care what Kate Brown did for the most part. And they've just been asleep at the switch, I think, in terms of just how badly Oregon policy matches up with what we were told Oregon policy would do by these folks. It's been an abject failure. And eventually some of the media comes around, like they did on 110. They started covering 110 more critically, but God, that took a long time. And a lot of people died in the process. And it's because the people who own, who work at those outlets like the idea of decriminalization, right? They probably voted for it. They think it's a good thing to do. And so it just takes them longer to come around, and everyone's biased. And, the stuff I write about, I don't typically write about, Republicans are doing this, that, and the other thing wrong, because I live in Oregon and Republicans don't matter here for the most part. So you need a cross section of different biases, basically, to give voters some sense of what's actually happening. And that's the fact that we haven't had that in Oregon in a long time, is part of why we are where we are.
Yeah, and I was just sort of skimming here at the top of the expensive regulations, and that's inflation.
Yep.
That's government-caused inflation, and it's not going to actually make life, dramatically better. What it is going to do is the people who can least afford to have their eggs cost $7, $8, $9, $10 for a dozen are going to be hurt.
Yeah,
that's no doubt about that.
Yeah, it was just the legislature just decided. Well, this Humane Society group was going to run a ballot measure in Oregon back in 2019 that would have really made eggs more expensive because it would have immediately forced everyone to go cage free with a bunch of other kind of stricter regulations. And so the legislature ended up passing a bill, and some Republicans voted for it because they're like, we want this bill rather than what this ballot measure would do. But ultimately it just took choice away from consumers. So if you're wondering why eggs are so expensive, one of the reasons why is in Oregon, as of January 1st, 2024, you cannot buy anything but cage-free eggs, and cage-free eggs add, 40 cents on average, 30 to 40 cents per dozen over what a cage, eggs from caged hens would cost, which is fine. Like there's a lot of people in the state that would be happy to pay more to know that their eggs came from hens who had not been caged. But there's a lot of people who don't. And it's those people who don't know, or it's the people who don't have, either they don't have the resources to buy cage-free eggs, or they don't care. And they're not following the issues because they have jobs and they're normal people. They keep getting hosed by regulations like this. And the egg thing is relatively small compared to the climate stuff that the state is doing, the dam stuff, like this stuff that just systematically makes everything more expensive.
The fuel for your car.
Yeah. It's just everything. And it's like, okay, well, I hope you all feel good now that you know that not only are you buying cage-free eggs, but you're forcing everyone in the state to buy cage-free eggs. Like, does that make you happier somehow? But
it makes progressives happier.
It does.
Actually, Unfortunately, all too often that seems to matter in this state, but for it to change, that has to stop being the most important thing that happens in the state.
Yep.
That'll fix it.
And I think a lot of it is people need to understand the connection between the people who they vote for and like their well-being. And it's expensive to live in Oregon. It's really expensive to buy a house or rent a house in Oregon. We don't get paid that much in Oregon relative to other states. It's like we kind of get it from all directions. And there's a reason for that. And the reason is the people that have governed us forever.
And we're chasing taxpayers who get fed up with it out of the state, which is only going to make it worse. And we're replacing them with people that think it's great if they, can do as much fentanyl as they want. There's plenty of them coming into the state. So it is what they call the doom loop, right?
It is.
And it's serious, but it's also a frog in the frying pan doom loop because it doesn't happen fast enough that everybody says the hell with this and expresses their will in an election. But there are people who are expressing their will by leaving.
A lot of them. Yeah. I mean, I think one of the best metrics to keep track of is just population, because it's hard to fudge that. And Oregon's population continues to decline for a couple of years in a row now, led by just the emptying out of Multnomah County. One of the few places that's growing is here in Bend, continues to grow. But the state as a whole is losing population. It's entirely possible that in 2030 we will lose the congressional seat we just got. Because we were, going up in population for a long time. And then now since 2020, which is the last redistricting, we're losing population pretty rapidly. So it's entirely possible we've just switched from a growth state into we're a Rust Belt state without the factories, right? Like it's dramatic, and it's all public policy. You know, there's some people that will never live in Oregon because of the weather or something like that, or
Yeah.
whatever. But there were a lot of people who wanted to live in Oregon for a long time because we've got a lot of space and it's beautiful here. And some people like the weather we have here. But what's changed is the public policy. It's driven people out, and it will continue to do that until there's a real change. And to me, it's as much a almost like a momentum thing than anything else. Like we need to overcorrect to a degree. Yeah. That message needs to be sent. Like, we don't tolerate crime. We don't tolerate illegal drugs. We're not going to raise your taxes. We're going to demand that our schools actually perform, or people are going to lose their jobs. It needs to be a whole pivot away from like doing everything we can to get rid of accountability to requiring accountability. And we can change the brand of this state pretty quickly.
Yeah, that's the thing, is that once that happens, people will be like, wow, this is a lot better.
Yeah.
Holy crap, let's keep this, yeah. And then it's a real struggle for the progressives to get back into the saddle again. They would need something to help them. They would need, unforced errors by conservatives or something like that to do it. Not that we're not capable of it.
Oh, we're completely capable. I mean, that's the other thing about the state slide part. I mean, the Republicans in Oregon own a significant part of that as well, just because we haven't always put up good alternatives. And we've lost our focus on stuff like cost of living and the policy stuff that's really degraded the state because we've got weirdos too.
Yep. Well, I think that actually, I love the stories that you write about this, because it's the stories I wish every journalistic entity was actually taking the time to focus on, and then a lot more people would know. But everybody watching this show knows that you're out there writing this. You've also got your podcast and some great interviews, which I think you also post on Substack, so people know.
It's all on Substack. Yep.
And I really appreciate the work that you've done to deep dive on LaMotta, Val Hoyle, and all that, because it's turning out that could actually make a difference. After 50 years, maybe we'll get a different party represented in the 4th congressional district.
I think it should result in that. I mean, there's, as you know, so many factors that go into how an election turns out. But Hoyle is she's bad, and it's an opportunity for people in the 4th district to elect someone who's not bad, that is more in line with their views and their interests. I mean, that the 4th district it's a beautiful, beautiful place. I love the 4th district, especially down Coos County, like Southern Oregon coast, and
Curry County, as you get down there, the beach and towards Brookings, it's just unbelievably, it looks great.
And there's hardly anyone down there. Like it's nice. Eugene's got its own vibe, but it's, those people, they deserve to have those people that don't live in Eugene, they deserve to have a representative who doesn't hate what they do for a living, or what they would do for a living if they were still allowed to do for a living what they used to do for a living,
Yeah. And also be able to protect themselves against the crime that's coming in there and all kinds of stuff that's just, they've been beset by all this. And it would send a message across the country. And you know what? Every seat in Congress, we know, counts. If Republicans control the House of Representatives by 1 seat, no one can tell me that 1 seat can't make the difference. By definition, it does.
It does.
Yeah. Well, thank you again, Jeff, for joining me here tonight. This has been fantastic, and I hope everybody enjoys this show. If they want more information about Jeff and the publishing he does, go to OregonRoundup.substack.com. Check out his blog. Check out his podcasts, and we look forward to the next time we're going to have you on, because I know there's going to be just as many great topics to cover. And who knows, Val Hoyle's probably not done.
No, she's the gift that keeps giving, I think, Kevin. But thank you so much for having me back on.
Thank you again. And thanks everyone for watching. Share the show with everyone you can. And we will see you on the next episode of The Captive Audience. Have